All right, after the death of Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire was divided into four parts, like we talked about yesterday. The Hebrew Jewish people came under the control of the Seleucids. Now, they went back and forth. They were controlled by the Ptolemies for a while. They were controlled by the Seleucids for a while. But when we get to the point where we're talking about, around 168 or so, they're controlled by the Seleucids. They're controlled by the Mesopotamian Greeks. The Seleucids ruled the former Mesopotamian part of the Persian Empire. They treated the Jews well, at least for a little while. Next. So here's where your notes begin. North of Palestine, where most of the Jews lived, was Syria. They were under the rule of the Seleucids, a vicious people under the rule of Antiochus Epiphanes. Now remember I told you yesterday, there's two main names with the Seleucids. You're going to have Seleucus, there's going to be 4 of them, and you're going to have Antiochus, and there's going to be 16 of them. Antiochus Epiphanes, who is Antiochus IV, he hated the Jews. He hated everything about the Jews. He thought they were weird for believing in one God. He didn't like that they wouldn't eat certain food. They didn't like it that they wouldn't work one day of the week. He didn't like their rituals. He did not like them at all. Antiochus pushed Hellenism, which is the Greek culture, to the extreme. He wanted all of his subjects to worship Greek gods, speak Greek, and follow Greek customs. So this was mainly, of course, they did Hellenization anyway. They wanted everybody to be Greek. It's easier to rule that way. But he pushed it to the extremes with the Jews. He hated the Jews. Hand up if you're still right. Okay. More product placement for Dr. Nutt. Next. He even went so far as to construct an altar to the mythical Greek god Zeus in the Jewish temple and demanded that they worship it. Jews who most strongly opposed this persecution were called Hasidic Jews, which means pious or humble. Next. The backlash. Now, everybody should remember what the first commandment was. Okay? And we realize that the first commandment was you should worship no other gods before me. And we know that the Jews have broken this commandment and have been punished for it. Right? So they were very, very much big on not breaking that first commandment because they didn't want things to happen to them again like being in Babylon. The persecution went on for some time until 168 BC when a village priest named Mattathias refused to offer sacrifice to the altar of Zeus. As a matter of fact, they sent a guy in there to kill a pig, to sacrifice a pig in the temple of the Lord. This guy gets up and just kills the guy in the temple and then runs out. When the Seleucid king heard about this, he sent a representative to investigate, and Mattathias killed him too. He then fled with his sons into the wilderness. Who's still writing? Hand up. Thumbs up when you're ready. Next. Next again. Soon after, Mattathias died, but his son, Judas Maccabeus, carried on the revolt. Next again. Joined by the Hasidic Jews living in the area, the Jewish people captured Jerusalem in 165. Next again. In December that year, they had refurnished the temple, purified it of Greek filth, and rededicated it to God, an event commemorated. Now, here's the thing. It says in Leviticus, I believe it's Leviticus, that you have to keep the lamps going all the time. You have to keep the eightfold candle going all the time with oil. Okay, but they only have oil enough for one day. And somehow, by some miracle, they kept it burning for 8 days, even though they ran out of oil. And so they celebrate these 8 days in December. Anybody know what the Jews call the celebration? And they don't have Christmas; they have Hanukkah, right? So that's what they celebrate. It's called the Feast of Lights. That's where it comes from. The Feast of Lights. Next again. North of next again. Are you going up? Hit it again. Hit it again. I think I copied most of it. Hit it again, hit it again, hit it again. Hit it again, hit it again. And again. I think we might be again. All right, so why is this important? Why is the Maccabean Revolt important? Well, the Jews actually win their independence from the Seleucid Empire. And they have help. They have help from a new little group of people just coming into their own called the Romans. The Romans will come and help them. Anything that weakened the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, the Romans were all about, because the Romans were starting to grow in power at this point. So eventually, the Jews they're autonomous. They have their own rule for about 100 years. Okay, and so they come under Roman control in 37. And the reason that I teach you this, and the reason this is important, is because when we get to the birth of Jesus, the Romans are always scared of another Maccabean revolt. And when Jesus starts preaching and starts having 5,000 people at one of his meetings, the Romans are going to be super nervous about that. And so the way that the Romans are going to treat the Jews, they're worried that Jesus is going to lead a revolt. The Jews themselves thought that Jesus was going to lead them to freedom against the Romans. That's not what he came to lead people to freedom from. But so I want you to know what the world around Jesus was like. It was a Roman world. Everybody spoke Greek. And the Jews were always looking for another revolt like this Maccabean revolt. Now, another revolt did happen, which we'll talk about later, about 30 years after Jesus is executed. But the Jews, the Romans were always worried about it. All right, as we say in my class, go forth and learn, because knowledge is power.